Hey guys, it's Steve, the drummer, coming at you today, and I wanted to talk about what is the weakest link in your electronic drum setup. And for me in particular, the weakest link would be, honestly, it would be cymbals as a whole, but for the most part, it would be the hi-hat. And if you stop and think about it, the hi-hat is probably the most expressive part of your drum set. I mean, obviously, there is an open position and a closed position, but there's also so many different variations of open and closed. I mean, there's probably, you know, hundreds of different combinations of just how open or closed your hi-hats are. Additionally, and this really boils down to my lack of knowledge of how my module works and how to best control things, but I have a hard time independently controlling the volume of the foot versus the hands. So in other words, in order for me to get the volume where it needs to be, to where the hand part is in the mix for either if I'm recording a drum cover or if I'm playing with my band, in order for me to get enough volume to where the hand part sounds good, the foot part becomes overbearing. It becomes way too much. And I have a tendency, a lot of times when I'm playing a groove, especially when I'm playing a groove on the ride cymbal, to either play 2 and 4 with my left foot, or play 1, 2, 3, 4 with my left foot, or play eighth notes with my left foot. And I feel as though it becomes overbearing in the mix. And so, like I say, that's probably something that I could delve deeper into the module and somewhat solve, but I haven't been able to do that so far. If you think about it, the hi-hat, it's kind of the groove, it's kind of the glue that holds everything together. You know, in terms of most popular music, rock music, country music, funk, soul, you know, and then it's also, it can function as the backbeat in softer types of music like jazz. Either way, I believe that the hi-hat is probably the most important part of your drum set, and for me, as an E-drummer, in my opinion, it's the weakest link. So let's take a second out and let's talk about maybe a little bit of history about the evolution of my E-drumming and different products that I've used and different challenges that I've run into. So when I started out with my TD11 drum set just a couple of years ago when I first made the leap over to electronic drums, and I had a CY5 little bitty, like, I don't know, probably 6-inch or so hi-hat cymbal that was mounted to the rack, and then it had an independent foot controller that sat on the floor. It was called an FD8. And so, you know, some problems that arose with that product. Number one, having a one-piece cymbal that was mounted to the rack versus on a hi-hat stand wasn't very realistic. It didn't have a very good feel to it when I played it. And then two, the FD8 foot controller, I think if you go on the internet and look, and certainly my experience was no different, it has some known issues with it. In particular, there's some little pieces of rubber or plastic in the internal inside the pedal that break down, and over time it does not trigger accurately. It doesn't trigger as well as it does when it's brand new. So you know, that was the first thing that I started out with, and so then I eventually traded in my TD11 drum set, and I got a TD30 drum set, and when it came with a VH11 hi-hat. And so the VH11 hi-hat, big upgrade from the CY5 and the FD8, it actually does mount to a cymbal stand, or a hi-hat cymbal stand, which was a big step in the right direction. And it's a two-piece construction, and there's one piece that sits underneath that is like a, I don't know, maybe like a cylinder type of thing, and it has a pressure sensor on it, and then it has a cymbal that sits on top of it. Now, the VH11 is a tried and true hi-hat, and you know, man, I think they've been making those things for the last 8 or 10 years, and it was definitely a good product for me. The known issues with that, though, is there's something in the wiring in that starts causing a double trigger to occur. And so, and mine was no different. I still have my VH11, and I keep it on my practice set at my band rehearsal space, but a lot of times I get some issues with double triggers with that. And I know now, I don't even think they're making, I think they've stopped making the VH11 and they replaced it with the VH10, which is essentially the same thing, However, I think they have made the casing a little bit harder to get into. A lot of guys who are doing like the DIY thing and going in and fixing their VH11, evidently that double trigger thing is some type of wiring short. And some of the feedback that I've read has been that the VH10 does not give you the options to go in and fix that issue quite like the VH11 did. So next up in the hi-hat journey for Roland, anyway, they developed a hi-hat cymbal called the VH12, which was the nicer version, the nicer upgraded version of the VH11. Now, in all honesty, I think Roland stopped making that a couple of years ago. They replaced it with a VH13, and I never had one, so my knowledge of what a VH12 was like is non-existent. And I got my ATV hi-hats, which I'll get into that in a few minutes. But at some point, my ATV hi-hat cymbal broke, and so I had to send it back to the manufacturer to get it replaced. And so during that time, I wanted to get a VH13 and try it out. Now, VH13 is Roland's flagship hi-hat, at least at this point, and they're like $750 brand new, maybe even more. I was looking at something the other day. They're like $775 or something like that now. So that, you know, you got to imagine with the tariffs and all that stuff that the prices have gone up. But nonetheless, I say that to say the VH13 is currently Roland's flagship hi-hat cymbal. $750+ for this thing. There's no way I could, you know, justify in my mind spending that kind of money. So I did go on Reverb and I found a used VH13, and I'll bring it over to the camera here in a second, but I wanted to talk about it for a second. So this particular one, a couple of things about it. Number one, it is the metallic version instead of the black version, which that Roland was offering this finish on their cymbals, I believe, in conjunction with the TD20 when it was the flagship, and then the TD30. So this probably was a set of cymbals off of a TD30 drum set, and they offered this type of finish on their cymbals for a period of time. However, they eventually discontinued it, and I can see why. This particular set of hi-hats, like I said, they were used, and I can see some chips in the finish, so I can see why they will probably roll this product out. It looks great. It looks better than the black cymbals, but it doesn't hold up. And so this one's these are not in bad shape, but nonetheless, I digress. So I got these for basically half of what a new set would have cost. They're around $350. Now, a couple of things when I first got them, putting them together was more complex than anything I could just figure out. Just plug it in and start playing it. So I actually had to go on YouTube and find a Roland video on how exactly to install these and get them set up and get all the wiring right. And there's this little gizmo that goes on the stand here that is supposed to keep them from spinning and all this different stuff. So anyhow, so I got the VH13 hi-hats. I only played them for a brief period of time because my replacement ATV cymbals came in, and so now I keep these as a backup. I always keep one pair of backup hi-hats on hand because, like I said, honestly, it's one of the most important parts of your drum set, number one. And number two, they're fragile, they break. And so I've got this now just to keep as a backup. But my impression is that they triggered really well. I think that they trigger better than the VH11 in that you can get some real differences in terms of how much pressure you're applying. And so I think this particular cymbal goes a little ways towards being a more expressive hi-hat. And but you know, too, Roland, this is probably about a 12-inch diameter versus a 14-inch diameter on my ATV cymbals, and so believe it or not, that extra 2 inches of diameter does make a difference to me. So my preference is to play the ATV cymbals if I can, but anyhow, the VH13 in the metallic finish. So I want to take a second out and basically show a closer shot of the Roland VH13 with the metallic finish. And like I said, I got them for about $350, basically a little under half of what it would cost to get a brand new pair. It's the metallic finish, and as I said earlier, you can see that there is some wear up here, and then there's a little bit of wear down here, and this is actually the playing area right here, the playing surface right here. So that's what's causing that, and then the other side, I don't know what caused that, but nonetheless, that's probably why Roland discontinued this particular finish. Though I've got to say, I mean, I think they're really nice looking cymbals, and they trigger great. And then I have got my my ATV hi-hats, which are the ones that I at this point anyway, am playing most commonly. Now, I got a set of ATV hi-hats with my ATV drum set when I first got it, and I made 2 videos on this topic already, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but one of them was exactly how the hi-hats function, and versus a pressure switch or whatever, it actually has a light sensor inside. There's an on-off switch, you have to plug them in. I made one dedicated video on how to actually use the cymbals and set them up in the module, and then I also made a second dedicated video. My hi-hats broke. I played them for a little over a year. They were out of warranty. I contacted ATV. They did a great job of taking those cymbals back, examining them, recognizing that they were broken, and replacing them for me, even though they were out of warranty. And I've already made a dedicated video on that, and I'll attach both of those in the description below. But nonetheless, kind of getting a little bit into the ATV cymbal as a comparison, when I first got my ATV drum set and my ATV hi-hats, I kind of had a love-hate thing with it. I like the fact that it's 14 inches. I liked a lot of aspects about the cymbal. However, when I played it, I had a hard time getting a closed sound, getting a fully closed sound. And so I found myself a lot of times in a song, basically every measure on one or somewhere within just about every measure or every other measure, or at least every 4 measures, I was having to close the hi-hat again to send that close signal, and then gradually over the measure or 2 measures or 4 measures or however long, it would start to sizzle open again and sound like I had an open hi-hat. So I went through a lot of frustrations initially with my ATV hi-hats, trying to get them set up properly and getting them to trigger properly. The problems were, more prevalent with certain drum sets and less prevalent with other drum sets. And so, I would play the ATV hi-hat for a while. I'd get frustrated with it. I'd take it away. I'd put the VH11 hi-hat back on the stand, play it for a while, and then something would click, and I would try the ATV cymbal again, and I would use it for a little while, and then I'd switch back to the VH11. I went back and forth a couple times. Actually, I had a window of time, probably from about, let's call it October, November, somewhere in that range, till early January when they actually broke. There's probably about a 2.5 or 3 month window where they triggered great. And then they broke, and I sent them back to ATV, and ATV replaced them. I've gotten this replacement set, and honestly, I've probably had this replacement set of hi-hats now for the better part of 6 weeks, and all the way up until yesterday, they performed beautifully, and now I'm starting to get some weird little trigger things happening with them, and I'm having to play with the settings. So anyhow, there's the ATV cymbals. So, you got the CY5 option with the FD8 foot controller, you've got the VH11, the VH10, the VH12, the VH13, and you got the ATV cymbals. I know that there's some manufacturers that make some metallic cymbals. Jobecki in particular is one that it functions like a VH11. It has a little controller underneath, and it has one piece on top. I know there's some other options out there, but that's been my experience with electronic hi-hats thus far. So what are some solutions to this? I know that there is a growing number of other electronic drummers that have YouTube channels that record covers that are starting to resort to just using acoustic hi-hats and miking them. Also too, there was a guy that I knew years ago that was playing an electronic kit live, and he played, and I'm thinking like we're going back to like the TD9 days or something like that, probably like 10 years ago or so, and he always just used an acoustic hi-hat. He never used an electronic hi-hat. So that's certainly one way to go, is to use acoustic hi-hats. I know one electronic drummer in particular. He plays in an 80s tribute band. The band is huge. They play all over the place, and they're really popular, and they really pack them in. He uses all acoustic cymbals. And while that certainly could work maybe in certain situations, I think you get into real big volume issues in that a lot of people use electronic drums because they're quieter. I mean, that's, that's a big reason to use electronic drums, is because they're quieter. And so I think when you start putting acoustic cymbals up, then you're starting to maybe defeat that, that concept a little bit, because honestly, when people complain about the volume of drums, the cymbals are probably the biggest offenders. So I can kind of sort of see getting away with using an acoustic pair of hi-hats and or maybe even an acoustic ride cymbal. And those are probably, in the scheme of things, some of the quieter cymbals, and you could probably make a pretty good mix performing live, and then certainly using mics and doing covers and stuff like that. But I think another problem that you introduce when you do that is your drumsticks. One of the many beauties of playing electronic drums, obviously it's quieter, but another one is you don't have typically the wear on consumables. You don't have the wear on drum heads. You don't have the wear on drumsticks. I've been playing this pair of drumsticks, and I've got actually 3 pair of drumsticks back here, but I've been using these drumsticks for like 2.5 or 3 years. I mean, I've been playing these. I mean, they're getting dirty. They're not going to break. They're just going to turn black, honestly, over time from just being used and used and used and used. And I've never had that phenomenon before. So, one of the true advantages to playing electronic drums is your consumables go down so much because you're hitting rubber and mesh, and as opposed to metal cymbals and rim shots on metal hoops and stuff like that. So if you mount an acoustic pair of hi-hats and you play, your kit like that, then you're going to reintroduce that wear factor, which is then going to, even if you don't play very hard and don't break your drumsticks, having all those chips in your drumsticks is going to start to cause a wear issue on your mesh drum heads, and you're going to wear those out, and so you're going to have to replace your drum heads, you're going to have to replace your drumsticks, and so that whole argument of e-drums being more friendly to your consumables starts to go away. But of course, then you might solve your sensitivity issues or your triggering issues with your hi-hat. I mean, that may be the only way to go at this point. Other possible solutions, everybody talks about the possibility of digital hi-hats in the future. Roland has the TD50 module, and they just introduced the TD27 module. Both of them support the digital pads, the digital ride cymbal, and digital snare drum. There's a third input that there's nothing that plugs into that at this point. And so maybe that's the future, is at some point, Roland, if you're listening, or for that matter, any electronic drum manufacturer, we need better hi-hats. I mean, we need better triggering accuracy on our hi-hats. And I see this in forums, I see this in videos, I see this issue being talked about. So anyhow, back to my original question, what is the weakest link in your electronic drum set, and what are your thoughts about that? What are some possible solutions? Hope you guys have a great day. Take care. Thanks.